everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm your instructor Joy. This video will be an answer to a subscriber. This violinist was asking about whether a beginner violinist could play or learn to play the violin without any fret or any tape guidance. Sometimes we see a little tapes on the fingerboard on beginner violin students, or sometimes even intermediate players when they're learning higher positions. And this violinist was wondering about my opinion and whether that could be done. And there was also referring some Russian violin instructors are opposing that one. Very interesting question. Thank you all for your nice questions, comments, sending me donations here and also in my Patreon page, booking lessons with me. I really appreciate. When it comes to such topic, when there are certain things that people do differently, but there are certain things like frets or tapes. We often like to use it at the very beginning, including myself. It is also true I've had students, especially adult students, adult and young students who had who had great ears. So I decided to teach them without any guidance of the finger tapes. But those are more exceptions. But majority of my beginner students, I start with the tapes or frets. However, I don't like those frets that covers the entire fingerboard, that has every single possible lines, because I find it that's a little too distractive. I personally like to use for very first class just 2 tapes for the first finger and third finger, and then as soon as they know how to place the fingers, and I get rid of them. And when my intermediate students start learning higher positions such as third position, and I leave only 1 tape where the first finger in the third position would be. And for the 5th position, I sometimes do that, but that depends how good their ears are. So now I voiced my opinion. It is possible to teach one without fret, and there is a way, but this violinist was wondering if I could show a certain left-hand frame so that one could teach itself or himself or herself. But we have to understand when it comes to know where to place the fingers. Of course, the left-hand frame is an important role, but the more important thing is knowing or being able to distinguish which one is in tune and not. So when I'm teaching a beginner student without any finger guidance, I make sure they have somewhat good ears. They don't necessarily have to have perfect pitch. Such thing can be trained, but they have good ears. How do we know that? So there's a simple way of testing. So you play certain note and see if you can hum it with your own voice, see if you can match that one. Or if you could not match it exactly, whether you could tell whether your voice was a little higher or lower, and so on. Just the fact that you can either hum it exact same tune or be able to identify where your voice is, whether it's high or low, that's a good sign that you have good ears. Then you are a good candidate to learn without any finger tape guidance or frets. So if you're one of those, or if your students are one of those, this is how it works. First, you need to have some kind of secondary help. That could be a tuner, a machine, a piano that can play notes, or an instructor who could play the notes for you and correct it. So let's say we are going to first play an A with a machine. Oopsie, that's not A. This is A. And then listen carefully and then see if you can hum it along that one. And then switch off. Remember that one and hum it again. And once you hear your tone in your head, it's easier to identify it. And then we're going to play again and see if you can hum it. If you can match it, and that's a good sign. Now that was open A. Another thing, after you play the note, you hum it again. I'm sorry, I have a little cold, so my voice is not the best, but that's the A. Now, next one, we're going to play A sharp with a machine, or you can play on the piano if you know how to play on the piano. If you have a violin teacher who knows how to play, then they would play the note for you. So I'm going to now play A sharp. Listen and then hum it. And then try to listen in your head. And that would be first finger. See if you can match that one. And then if you can't, quite sure if you can't tell, then play again. And then hum it. Listen into your head and then make exact note that matches to your voice. Then. Now, then you go to the next step. Now, B. Then again hum it. And try to create the note. Then compare whether it's saying. On and on. So that's basically how one teaches how to place a left finger on the right spot using the ears. Now, that's the first way. Second way is using open string. And if you know how to, this is a little more tricky because the student has to know how to place two strings at once, which is not always, almost never easy for beginners. That's why, because they're beginners, yeah? But if you have a student who can play two strings, which I've had a beginner student like that, then they can use open strings as a finding the right note. So you would play open A and D, for example. Then you play A sharp. There is a term of intonation called just intonation, which means when two notes are perfectly in tune, it opens up, it vibrates all of a sudden big, and one could hear when it's in tune. Yeah. So almost all people can hear, even when some people claim they can't tell, because when it's in tune, we can tell that's in tune because the vibration, the way the huge vibrato it happens in the air. Yeah. So that's another way. Then you go. And in this case, it's a bit easier because you're playing same note D, just an octave difference, so you can compare with open D like that. That's a secondary option. It's not always applicable to all players, but to some. Now, when it comes to left hand frame, so in general, whether you're playing with frets or fingertips or not, the fingers should be lined as the fingerboard. Yeah. So like this, when the pink is far away, it's going to be hard to reach you. So turn your hand that way. All the fingers are lined same as a fingerboard. That's the right hand frame. Yeah. And then when it comes to left thumb, make sure not too tall or not too low, just enough that you're touching about in the first joint here, but very gently. Try not to hook it too much. Just keep it very light touch. Yeah. So you're holding the violin with your shoulder and chin, but you are just touching the thumb gently to use once in a while to rely on it, but not most of the times. So that's basically is. I personally prefer to use finger tapes for most of the students, even though I've had exceptions. Students with good ears, I thought it was worth for them not to use finger tapes, because ultimately we have to know how to play without tapes and without frets. Even though that can be done, I personally find it physical help can save a lot of time. But you know, if you tried and it worked with you well, just using or training your ears, good for you. Try it. Every method is always worth trying, and you will never know until you try it, right? So try it and let me know. Let us know. Share with us and how it went, and if it worked, please feel free to share so that we all can benefit. Okay? Thank you for watching and happy practicing. Bye-bye.